SCOTUS belittles district courts and coddles Trump's regime. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe. And today I just want to do a brief rundown of 4 cases that came out of the Supreme Court that sends sort of a ominous message about where the court stands when it comes to basic humanity, decency, and just where the court was just 10 years ago. So, first one that I want to talk to you about is the case where the court stayed the district court's order that stopped the government from sending people to third countries, not to countries where they came from, but to third countries. Well, what is the substantive effect of that stay? It essentially means that while the district court is litigating the case of whether or not these people can be sent away, or whether or not they have due process of law, whether or not they're getting due process of law, all those questions that we have been sort of muddling over with Abrego Garcia and then Manuel Gutierrez and Andre Romero and the Tren de Aragua situation, that case. This is another separate case that deals with the immigration thing. And the Supreme Court essentially stays the lower court's order, saying, no, while the court proceeds with the litigation, we are going to keep letting Donald Trump do what he is doing under his executive order. That's what it means when you grant that stay of a lower court's order. Then comes another ruling about birthright citizenship. And this case, and I told you this exact thing would happen. In this case, the case is not about the merits of birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. The case is about whether a district court has the ability to impose injunctions that go beyond the people who are in the case. So, can lower court, the district court, can they impose a nationwide injunction? And the Supreme Court said that lower courts may have that power in certain cases, but in this case, the lower court exceeded its authority because there was no showing that it was impacting the law itself is, or the executive order is impacting the whole country. Well, I mean, that was talked about in Justice Sotomayor during the oral arguments, I believe, for this case, when Justice Sotomayor was talking about how this deals with a constitutional provision, and therefore, it's not just, it's not any other issue. It's core constitutional provisions that the executive order is going against, the birthright citizenship executive order, and therefore this qualifies as a nationwide injunction. And because the relief being sought here would be sought by everybody else who would be in this position as well. But no, that's not how the court that ruled in this case, 6-3, the opinion written by Amy Coney Barrett, said no, in this case, the court's ruling only is limited to the plaintiffs and not to others. So, the questions rise about what happens when birthright citizenship cases come up in other jurisdictions. There's really no basis for saying, oh no, the court has already held that in this instance, the injunction would apply nationwide, and therefore you can't do that in this case. That case would have to prove that they are entitled to birthright citizenship, and in that specific case, and the lower court, depending on how that plaintiff comes, whether it is 20 states coming as a class and 20 plaintiffs coming as a class action, how it is presented will determine the breadth of that injunction. But what I said would happen when Donald Trump took this procedural win to mean that he could go out there and keep on kicking people out based on his interpretation of birthright citizenship. That is not the case. That is not the ruling. The ruling is that the judge's order in this birthright citizenship case is limited to the plaintiffs, limited to the people in the case, as opposed to everybody in a similarly legal situation in any other court in the federal system of the judiciary. Then two cases that came to our attention was the trans rights case, in which the court essentially said that trans rights are low-level liberty interests, and that the state and under the 14th Amendment could impose, if it has a legitimate reason to impose restrictions on trans minor medical procedures for minors, then that the level of protection that trans people would get is the lowest level of constitutional protection you can get, which is rational basis. And that kind of drags down what the impression that the court gave 10 years ago in Oberfell, when it raised the LGBT community to a protected class by saying that we do have the right to same-sex marriage. Well, in this case, trans rights of minors is a low-level liberty interest over which the state, if they have a legitimate reason, can have laws that restrict those rights. And the fourth case is the case about the District of Maryland having books in their school system, about 5 books, that talk about LGBT concerns. And the question is, the law in that school district, in that state, is that you have to send your children to school, and you will be fined if you don't. So what the court ruled is that parents can remove their children from these schools if the school district's curriculum is one that goes against their religious beliefs. So this is another case, and I think both of them were written by, the majority opinions were written by Justice Alito. And when Justice Alito writes an opinion about substantive due process, you kind of know he's going to stamp it out and favor the government anyway. And so you sort of have to look at the kind of the disrespect that Alito has for these rights and for minorities of the LGBT population. And you see that in these two cases. And in the first two cases, you see how the Supreme Court is undermining and belittling district courts while not really providing clearly what would constitute a law in determining these jurisdictional matters in the immigration case and now the limitation of national injunctions, thereby cutting down the judiciary's own power and leaving more power to the Supreme Court to later on decide what the course of action will be. It leaves a lot of things in limbo. It shows that this Supreme Court is irresponsible, though it sometimes has sparks of rational obligation to the Constitution. It sort of is blowing in the wind, don't know where we're going to go, uncertainty driven, as Professor Lawrence Tribe said, imperial Supreme Court. With that in mind, we have to keep moving forward, and I'll come back to you with more legal updates and other updates. I didn't go into specifics of each of these cases because the cases are really depressing. You see that it goes against common sense, human decency, and the idea of ordered liberty when the court is hacking off and lower courts that say that no, these similarly situated citizens should be provided with these safety measures like a nationwide injunction in a case like birthright citizenship, because otherwise Donald Trump is going to take that procedural victory and turn it into a substantive victory and go after people on the basis of who he thinks do not have birthright citizenship. And it will create a whole nother mess of people who are being deprived their rights and American citizens who are being denied their birthright citizenship. So, with that said, thank you for putting up with me. I'll talk to you soon. Please like and subscribe if you like the video, and do share. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon.